It's time for another Star Wars book review. I'm John Barry, and today I'm reviewing Star Wars, Thrawn Ascendancy, Chaos Rising. Before I get too far into my review, I would like to announce that last week I started a blog, the 555th review. Link will be in the description. So if you want to go, feel free to go check that out. Now back to the review. So Chaos Rising is the first chance in the new canon that Thrawn has to really explore the character of Thrawn without being hampered by existing canon stories. So, basically has much more creative freedom. I would say he still had a fair amount, but it was more of, he only had small time frames that he could be creative freedom at, and there were still things like, okay, well, this has to happen, so kind of a little bit more common, but this is the first time where he really has much more ability to write the story and develop the character without really needing to worry. And that's because this book and the other books in Thrawn Ascendancy's probably it's going to end up being a trilogy, but it's all set before Thrawn joined the Empire. So we get to see him as an officer in the Chiss expansionary fleet, basically the Chiss military. And also in Chaos Rising, this is a younger and you can even say a less mature Thrawn. Now it does overlap a little bit with the Clone Wars era story of Thrawn alliances, but it's only a small overlap, and it's really just the starting is just told from Thrawn's from the Chiss perspective, and then we just skip to the aftermath of it basically. So it's acknowledged, but it's not really retold at all in the story, which actually does make sense and all that. Now, I would say that Thrawn, despite being probably less mature as he will come to be, he is still just as brilliant and probably even more politically inept than he normally is. Though, from what I've gathered, Imperial politics are easier to navigate than Chiss politics. Don't know if that means anything, but that's just my impression I've gotten so far. And I also would say he's not as cautious as he will become once he starts serving in the Empire. Probably because he has to really pay cautious, otherwise the Empire might go after the Chiss, so that probably explains part of the reason. Among the Chiss, he feels like he can take more risks, which still makes sense. And he still always has no contingency and backup plans. But it's clear that he is, I would say, in Chaos Rising, which makes sense. It's Chaos Rising. That's more talking about the area surrounding the Chiss. But we'll get to that later on, hopefully in the review. But yeah, I would say Thrawn is more willing to take risks at this stage in his life. And besides learning more about Thrawn, we learn more about this Chiss culture and society as a whole. How Chiss politics works, how basically the 9 ruling families are the top, but there's a bunch of smaller families too that are vying for their own power to hopefully one day become a ruling family. There's the social structure and how each family has, they have merit adopted. So basically, Chiss not born into the family that they adopt into the Chiss family. And when they talk about family, think of it maybe more like a clan than a family. And that's probably a better way of kind of looking at them from an outside perspective. And then they go, you have up the ranks, merit adoptive. Then you got child born, which are basically those who've gone through a trial. And then you have ranking distant and cousin, blah, and so forth. And so, we learn about basically Chiss social structure and Chiss politics all in one go because they are basically intrinsically linked. And a little bit about the Chiss military, how, once a officer becomes a flag officer, so that would be rank commodore or above, so commodores and admirals and generals, they basically are no longer part of a family, basically. I think in legend it was described for flag officers that the Chiss military becomes their family. They didn't describe that in Thrawn Chaos Rising, but I would say it's still probably much, their family is the Chiss Ascendancy itself. They don't have, their loyalty is no longer to their Chiss family, but to the Chiss as a whole. that's the impression that I've gotten. And actually, we get to learn more about one of these characters. That would be Aulani. You may have remembered that name from the. She definitely made an appearance in Thrawn Treason, and I think she might have made an appearance at the end of Thrawn itself. And she, if I remember correctly, was a character from Legends as well. But we also get to learn more about her, and also her connection with Thrawn, which basically goes back to their academy days. So when the Chiss Military Academy or whatever it's called, I forget the planet's name, but basically when he was so she was basically a senior cadet, or he was basically a junior cadet, or you could say even if in our term we probably say freshman. But basically they were basically, you could say, rough couple years apart. And there was basically Thrawn was accused of cheating, and Aulani was part of the people who were defending Thrawn. And they managed to successfully defend Thrawn, proving that he didn't cheat. So some pretty ingenious stuff. And actually, in the sense that we get a lot of flashback sequences, and that's how we learn about the how basically Thrawn and Aulani got to know each other. And also with all this, we learned that Aulani is one of Thrawn's closest allies in the Chiss military, and another close ally in the Chiss military for Thrawn is a general. I'm looking at my notes. Bakif, if I pronounce that correctly. We don't get as much character development with him, but we learn about him, and that basically since Thrawn was a cadet, he was always kind of keeping an eye on Thrawn. So there is that to kind of acknowledge. And also, I picked this up, and some other people also, I noticed on Twitter talking about this, that they detected either a semi-romantic or romantic subtext between Thrawn and Aulani. I do want to say I don't think that will go anywhere. And you mostly only picked it up when basically in only the flashbacks passages, never in the present passages of the book. So that tells me, one, that maybe it was there, but neither of them acted on it, and probably both of them I feel like are basically too connected, basically too loyal to their duty to actually probably even consider it for more than a briefing second. Plus, while it seems like Thrawn is decent at picking up basically when people are in emotional distress, that seems to be like the only emotion he's really good at picking up on. The other emotional stuff, I don't think he's as good as picking up, so I don't think he will even notice. So that's just the impression I've gotten from Thrawn. I could be wrong. But yeah. So that's actually it I have for my notes. So I'm just going to set my notes there. So we're going to talk more about the book in general now that my notes are at the end. My notes will be made available to my patrons though, so consider checking my Patreon page out if you want access to them and some other stuff. But yeah, so we learn a lot of other stuff about the Chiss and all that, and the unknown regions, which they call the Chaos. We learn how we already knew about Chiss Skywalkers and how that's a closely guarded secret, but we also learned that to the extent whenever they're on diplomatic missions and such, they will basically hire out navigators from the Navigator Guild and its subgroups to navigate those ships through hyperspace, basically using the Force so that they don't have to reveal the Chiss Skywalkers to outsiders, which I think is actually a very neat thing and unique, perhaps. Like they're willing to basically spend money for something they don't need in order to keep a secret. Actually, one of the major characters in Thrawn, in Chaos Rising, besides Thrawn and Aulani, is a former Chiss Skywalker who also became a merit adopted into the Myth family. And because I want to make sure I'm pronouncing her name correctly, I am going to look it up real quick. It's her shortened name, I should say, because I'm not going to say the longer name, is Salius. So, a former Chiss Skywalker, and basically because of the interaction she had with Thrawn right as her career as a Chiss Skywalker was ending, basically convinced her that she would seek out for which family would adopt her to be the Myth family, which is the same family that Thrawn is a male adoptive in. And actually in the book we get to see her go through the trials to become a child born in the Myth family. So that's actually kind of neat. So we get to basically, she's the one who's going to be Thrawn's political ally in the Chiss, is how it's all set up to be. And we also learned that at one time, Chiss Skywalkers, they all have caretakers, but at one time they were former Skywalkers themselves. And actually, in order to observe Thrawn on a mission in here, she basically gets herself placed as a caretaker for a Chiss Skywalker, which I think is actually kind of neat. And there's some Chiss family politics going on to get her involved, get her that placement and all that going on. So there's Chiss politics going on all the time in the background of the book that we only know because we saw in characters other than Thrawn who probably would not pick up on any of that stuff unless somebody told him. But getting back to the character Salias, so she actually becomes a caretaker to a young Chiss Skywalker, even though she really hasn't had any experience being a caretaker herself. But I myself think they probably should make more former Chiss Skywalkers the caretakers, because guess what? They've gone through the same experience as the Chiss Skywalkers. I mean, who better to take care of somebody than somebody who knows what they're going through? I mean, there's a reason why in real life, history students are taught by history professors. Med students are taught by, doctors. Nurse students are taught by nurses, or maybe retired ones, but those who've gone through the exact same stuff. The only difference might be updated research. English majors are taught by English professors. Generally with any profession, you are taught by those who are of that profession, who know what you're going through. Granted, we don't have anything involving the Force in that, but there is something to say that being guided by people who know, basically, maybe not know your exact situation, of course, but basically are doing, one step what you are currently doing, it makes sense for any profession. And I feel like maybe for the Chiss Skywalkers, that thing should be taken up. Have the former Skywalkers who want to, of course, don't force them, but have them be the caretakers and mentors to the young Chiss Skywalkers. It's just an idea. I wonder if that's going to be suggested by Salias in the later book. It's always possible. Maybe even Thrawn. That's something I think he would pick up on. I really do think that is the one political thing he would pick up on, because he would see it as, if I suggest this, it will actually be the benefit for all the Chiss. That's probably, he would see it as more of a tactical thing. But actually we do learn how Thrawn sees people in this book, which I didn't talk earlier, but we learn about this character, how he sees people, not necessarily as people, but as assets, basically. That's part of the reason why I think he can sometimes detect a person's emotional distress, but not that well, and so basically he sees them as assets. So when he sees that their emotions are impacting their ability to do their job, he recognizes that, but he doesn't recognize when it's other emotions going on. That's the impression I've gotten, but it's very interesting how he sees other people. It's also probably explains why he is so tactical and all that. Everything around him is basically a tool, an asset to be analyzed. And I think that's a very important insight into Thrawn that we don't really get. But also I think that's evident of a younger, less mature Thrawn, because I feel like as he matures, he starts seeing certain people as less as assets, but as more of people, not necessarily people to be molded, but kind of, people who can be something, who basically don't need him around. Eli Vanto from the first Thrawn book, who also made appearances in Thrawn Treason, he's another good character. I could see Thrawn saw Eli Vanto probably in event over time, he's something special. I can teach him what I know, and he can do what I do someday. I think that Thrawn may have saw Eli maybe at first as an asset, but he could have easily also seen Eli for Eli's potential that we see Thrawn mold Eli for, which I think is actually a neat way of exploring and I hope we actually get to see more of that in the future. Probably not immediately in the Ascendancy line, but you never know. Maybe, I think an Eli Vanto book would actually be neat. Even though he's never once brought up, I just brought him into this video because I wanted to. I also see there are some certain other characters where I think Thrawn sees them as more than just assets, but I don't see, I think maybe Alani is one of them, because, he recognizes Alani's skill and brilliance and all that, so I feel like the smarter you are, the more Thrawn sees out of you, and more he sees you as more than just an asset. Even though he says he sees everyone that way, I don't quite think that's true because of the way he treats certain people over others, but I think it's very much true that Thrawn, when he sees people, he sees them for what they can be used for, and how they can fit into a larger puzzle. That is how Thrawn sees stuff. And it's also amazing because, Thrawn figures it out, but we still don't, even though we've gotten all the single clues, we're still a few steps behind Thrawn in understanding everything that's going on. And that happens in this book. Thrawn has basically come up with a solution to solve the problem, but we still don't quite see what he's going for. But as it unfolds, it is revealed to us, the audience, as it is revealed to the other characters. So a good Thrawn story will always have a surrogate. And I would say Salias is our surrogate in this story. Eli Vanto was our surrogate in the first Thrawn book. And there's always basically a surrogate that we can see Thrawn through. Even sometimes we may get a glimpse into Thrawn, but our main thing is we're always seeing Thrawn somehow through a surrogate character. In this one, we have Alani Salias. There's a Chiss captain, commander, I forget his exact rank, that we also see Thrawn through. Even the Chiss Skywalker, I think we get one or two passages from her perspective. But we are always seeing Thrawn through another character. And that's in this first Thrawn book, we had Thrawn's diary entries every now and then to give us insight into his character. But I think it's very much true that Thrawn is a character experienced through surrogates. He's not a character you experience because you can best follow along with the surrogate to solve the mystery as they are solving the mystery, even though Thrawn is still a step or two ahead of you. So that is Thrawn's character. And it's always very consistent. We're always seeing Thrawn through some surrogate. Whether it be, Eli or whoever. It's always through a surrogate. Even in the other Trees and Alliances, we got to see Thrawn through Anakin and Darth Vader. It's like, you always see Thrawn through somebody, and rarely do you see Thrawn through Thrawn. Which I think is a neat way of exploring the character as a whole, a neat writing strategy to explore the main character. We rarely actually ever get to see through the main character's eyes, for lack of a better term, in the Thrawn books. Which I think is just a unique and inventive way of exploring the character. So I think that's where I'm going to end the review. I could talk more about the story, I could talk more about the writing, but I think I focused on the most important parts. Probably some trivia parts as well, knowing me. So thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a like or dislike it if you didn't enjoy. Also be sure to check me out on social media, Facebook and Twitter. Links for them are in the description, as is a link for my Discord server, JohnBerry555's Docking Report. It's a great place to hang out and chat. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so. It will help you to keep up to date on when my latest videos come out, and I would really appreciate it. Also, feel free to check out the video or the playlist on screen now, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you, always.